Hey everyone, it's Ben from Board to Bits, and this is part 4 of our modular texture tutorial in Unity. Now we're going to take all 3 of our textures and layer them one on top of another. So let's jump over to MonoDevelop and get this started. So right now we just have one single source layer. We're going to need to change this into an array of layers. And I'm actually going to rename this to layers as well. Now it's going to break a few things in here. One of which is this the width and height of our texture that we're ultimately going to be building to. So we can change that, and we're going to say here layers 0 and layers 0. And what that does is it basically we're going to set our base layer. Hopefully all of our layers will be the same size, but if they're not, we can at least set the size of the texture to that first base layer, and then that'll kind of be the anchor from which everything else progresses. Now we have here the source array. Probably not, I don't know that we're going to be able to work with this in the exact same way that we did originally, because how we had this set up was that we would get the array for each. Actually, I know a way that we can do this, and it'll be nice and clean for us. So instead of just doing one single array, we're going to do an array of arrays. And that we are going to call new, or we're going to make that a new array, or new, color, and that's going to be the size of the length of our layers list, or array, I should say. So layers.length, and then we don't know exactly what the length of each layer within that is going to be. However, what we can now do is populate each of those. So we'll say populate source array with layer arrays. And so how we can do that is we'll say for int, actually we can do there we go. Just hit tab twice, makes it a lot easier. And we'll say for I equals 0, I is less than layers.length, I++. So what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through in layers up here. For each layer that we have here, we are then going to populate this the secondary array, if you will. So what we'll do is we'll say source array I equals get pixel, or layers I dot get pixels. So for each layer that we have, we're going to get all the pixels of that and put it into one of the secondary arrays within our array, or source array. So now that we have a destination array that we want our ultimate pixels to go to, as well as this list of arrays of all the colors that we're going to be combining, we can now go through our same system of going from pixel by pixel. One thing I do want to do first, though, is that we've got this is all happening right now in our start function, and that's getting really clunky. So I'm going to start breaking this up a little bit into what we're actually doing here. What we're doing is we are making a texture and then making a sprite using that texture. And so I'm going to want to make a couple of functions that do these two things. So I'll do one down here called void make texture. And then we'll do one more called void make sprite. And void make sprite, all that's going to do is we're really just going to copy these two lines right here. Cut those, paste them in here. And so we create a new sprite, and we're going to use the texture like we did before. The problem is right now this can't reference the texture because our texture is actually being defined inside of, right now, our start function. So we need to make that a global variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete text there, and up here we're going to say texture 2D text. So now this is a global private variable, but a global variable, so anything within this class can find it, meaning that our make sprite can get that. And then down here, instead of redefining it, we're just going to put in that we're going to have a new texture 2D there. So that should all work. And now I can actually cut and paste all this into make texture. So that all we have to do now is say make texture and then make sprite. And this way too, we could also have this happen in different locations. Instead of doing it right at the start, we could do it, say in an update function, we get a key press, that's when we make this, or we could refresh it, or things like that. It's a lot easier than having to recopy all of that from the start function to some other function. So now that we finally have all this done, we can look again at the layers here. Currently what we've been doing is we're just taking from a source array, getting a pixel from it, and dumping that same exact pixel into our final image. Instead, what we want to do is we need to go through all the layers and do this. So we can do this relatively easily. What we can do here, we do need to add one more for loop in here, and that's going to be for. Actually, it's similar to this one up here. We're actually using almost the exact same language, layers.length, because for each single pixel that we go to, we need to go through each layer and figure out what that pixel is going to look like. And then we can move all this into there. We still want pixel index, because that's going to be important for our, actually we can even move this. We don't need to do this for every layer, but we do need to figure that out initially. So we can move that out of the layer loop, because that's going to, this is only affected by X and Y, not by the I. And now what we can do is, instead of saying source pixel equals source array pixel index, we're going to say source array I, because that's going to get us the current layers array, and then pixel index. So now what we're doing is we're going through each layer. For each layer, we're going to find the pixel and make that the pixel in our ultimate destination texture. We can see how that works now. If we go back to Unity, to our sprite maker, we should see that we now have some kind of a, oh, whoops, never put parentheses on get pixels. Works better that way. Any other issues? Nope, that's it. Okay, so now we have this array of layers. Nothing in it right now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my textures. I'm going to add the circle, and then the line, and then finally the square. So we have 3 layers in this image. We can hit save, and what's going to happen is for each layer, for each pixel, we're going to go through each layer and add the circle, then the line, then the square. So what we should have is the circle on the bottom of the bottom quote of the image, or the background of the image, then the line, then the square. Let's hit play and see if this works. So it doesn't quite work, and this is what I was expecting, but as we see here, we're just seeing the square, the final layer that we have. Why aren't we seeing the line behind it or the circle behind that? Well, that's because when you give texture information and put it into a texture, it doesn't account for the fact that some of those pixels might be transparent. Unity doesn't know inherently to say, oh, this is transparent, so I should let whatever's there still come through. It just replaces it with a transparent pixel. What we need to do is we need to account for that fact, and we can do that pretty easily here. Let's jump back into MonoDevelop. What we're going to do down here is we're going to still get the source pixel like we did, but then we're going to add a quick if loop, or not an if loop, an if condition. We can do that if I can highlight this, and we go down to surround with. We're going to type in if. You don't want hashtag if, you just want if. And not if true, but rather what we want is if source pixel dot a, which is the alpha, which is the amount of transparency, equals 0, meaning if it's completely transparent, then, or sorry, not if it equals 0. If it's greater than 0. If it's not completely transparent, only then do we actually want it to populate into the image. Not if it's less than that, or not if it's completely if it's completely transparent. It shouldn't block anything behind it. My muddled way of saying that. So now we can hit play, and we should see now the circle, the line, and then the square. which we do. We have our full circle right here, line behind that, and our square on top of that. We do notice, however, especially if I'll zoom in here a little bit further, that this is not very clean. We see that the line has this kind of a transparent border around it. The square is pretty clean because it's just a flat square. But actually, if I do this, if I switch these around and make the square on the bottom and the circle on top, you'll see this even more pronounced. We're getting this weird kind of a border of semi-transparent pixels around these things, almost cutting into what's behind it, where what we'd really want is for the blue to kind of bleed through a little bit here. And the reason for that is the same reason that the box was just obliterating everything else before. Unity doesn't know to say, oh, this is semi-transparent, so I should let the color of the blue come in through behind this rather than just getting rid of it altogether. And so that's going to take us a little bit more doing to see how we can, kind of make an additive or a multiplicative blending situation. If you've done any work in image editing programs, you'll know those kind of blending modes, instead of just completely replacing the pixel over it. That's what we're going to get into in the next part of this video series, so I will see you next time.